Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I'm delighted to welcome State Senator from Michigan, Mallory McMorrow. You may remember that she gave a floor speech that went viral after a fellow state senator accused her of trying to, and I quote, groom and sexualize kindergartners. She has now decided to run for the U.S. Senate. We're going to talk about that. And she's out with a new book called Hate Won't Win: Find Your Power and Leave This Place Better Than You Found It, which is a very long title that usually publishers don't like. But let's start with that. Why the title, and did that come out of your experience on the Senate floor in Michigan?
It did. I said very clearly in my floor speech in 2022 that hate will only win if people like me stand by and let it happen. And I very intentionally identified myself multiple times as a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom who knows that hate will only win when people like me let it happen. And the title is an ode to the speech, but also a call to action for all of us. I have had feedback, unsurprisingly, in this moment of people saying, like, it feels like hate won. And hate may be having a moment. I think that maybe it's won the battle, but it certainly hasn't won the war. And what we are seeing over the last few weeks, it feels like people are coming out in droves to town halls and coffee hours and are asking very tactically what they can do. They want to raise their hand. They want to participate. They want to fight back and create a country that we can all be proud of. And this book is that. It is part a memoir and part a how-to guide, a manual for people to find their own voice and their own power and to participate effectively in making change.
It is kind of a do your own kind of manual. Give us a sense of the steps that you recommend that people who want to be involved, who want to leave this a better place, should be taking right now.
So number one, and this is the first chapter in this section, is find yourself, find your purpose. I talk to a lot of people who say that they're overwhelmed right now, that there is so much coming out of this administration that they have to respond to, that it feels like whack-a-mole. They don't know where to start, and they're sending all these emails and they're doing all these phone calls, and it doesn't feel like anything matters. So my first piece of advice is you can't do everything. Imagine if you tried to become a chef and play the violin and learn how to run. You try to do everything once, you're not particularly good at any of it. So pick one thing. And this takes some reflection on who you are, what you really care about, what issue really moves you that maybe you have personal experience on, and give yourself permission not to ignore everything else, but not to respond to everything else. I tell the story often of a constituent of mine named Jane. She's a domestic violence survivor, and I've gotten to know her over my 6 years in office. We now have an address confidentiality law in the state of Michigan because Jane shared her lived experience and what she went through with an abusive ex. And she used her voice and built a relationship with me as a legislator that now I go to her on any issue related to domestic violence. We all have that issue in our lives. And then from there, I go into how to tell a compelling story, how to engage with elected officials and which elected officials to engage in. Spoiler alert, start at the local level and work your way up, not the other way around. You are more likely to build an actual relationship like I have with Jane. And then just keep going. My biggest fear is that people check out. So
Yes.
it's a step-by-step guide to ensure people do not check out, but that you can sustain throughout the next 4 years and hopefully the rest of our lives.
Well, your step one is exactly what Nancy Pelosi likes to say, which is find your why, meaning
Yes.
why are you moving? Why are you doing this? You said you were somewhat gratified, as are we at the Contrarian, because granted, our audience and our viewers are very active and very motivated. But around the country, you do see an incredible amount of action. Do you think this will continue to build on itself? And what do you think it takes to keep the ball rolling and to gather steam?
So I do, and it's very different than what we saw after the 2016 election. We have people coming out to my town halls at one where we had overflow capacity, more than 100 people spilling out into a library hallway, and 3 people in attendance were federal workers who had either already been fired or knew that they were going to be fired. One who worked for the VA, one who worked for the NIH, and one woman who was so terrified of retribution, she did not want to tell us what department she worked for. And what we're hearing across the board now, instead of just demands to know what we're doing about it, people want to know what they can do. And to sustain this, I think any of us who are in positions of power, who hold elected office, have to bring people into this process. Ben Rhodes had a great op-ed last week in the New York Times that pointed out that he thinks the success of the MAGA movement is because it treats people like the MAGA movement needs people, not the other way around. And that is a mindset that I think Democrats and those of us who are opposed to this administration can learn from. Treat people with respect and like they are part of the team and bring them in because they are. People are smart and engaged and want to be a part of something, not just dictated to.
Right. We have made our views known about Senator Schumer and his capitulation to the continuing resolution deal. And at the same time, we have told people that the democracy fight is despite him, not for him or with him. You've been very candid about Senator Schumer. I think not only in this context, but a general mindset. Talk a little bit about that and whether that is more ideological or more do we fight harder and more about active and aggressive politics rather than reactive politics.
I do. And I do think it's the latter. I don't think it's about where, he falls on the political spectrum or where any of us do, but it's how you respond to this moment. People want to know that you believe there is going to be a future, that you can articulate what that future is, and that you are willing to fight for it. One of the things that I made clear with my interview with Politico is this is no longer the Republican Party. I won and I got into office in a Republican district. I represented Mitt Romney's hometown. This is not Mitt Romney's Republican Party. This is the MAGA Party. And that requires a very different response that recognizes it's not about the same norms or rules or processes or institutions. It's people who quite literally want to tear it all down. And we need a new generation of leadership. And this is not just about age. This is about your approach. Do you recognize this moment and are you prepared to respond to it in that new way?
You are running for the US Senate now, so eventually you'll have an opportunity if you
Well,
win.
I've not made any announcements officially.
All right, you're considering running.
Yes.
So I'll take a bet that you probably will. You will eventually get a chance to vote for the majority or minority leader, and depending upon how the Democrats do you have a sense, if not of the person, the type of person that you should be leading in the US Senate?
Yeah, I am really excited to see, particularly from a state like Michigan, we've seen Senator Stabenow lead by example and recognize that we've done incredible work to build up a new generation of Democratic leaders. And now we have Senator Alyssa Slotkin, who delivered the response to the State of the Union, and I think just did a phenomenal job to break through the noise, to talk directly to people in a very no-nonsense way. And we see this now with Senator Peters, who is deciding to make the same decision and recognizing that it's not a negative to bring the next generation of leadership up, to work hard your career and to take a step back and bring that leadership forward. So that's really what I'm looking for in leadership. Somebody who recognizes not only how to respond to this moment, but how to clearly articulate what the Democratic Party is for, that we should be fighting for a version of the new American dream where people can believe that they can afford to buy a house, that they can send their kids to great schools, that they will have careers that they've dreamed of, and that we believe in reforming institutions, recognizing that a lot of people don't believe that the status quo is okay anymore. Who knows how to directly communicate with people? Who knows how to bring a caucus together? And who is going to guide us into the future? I think that that's one of the things that I saw throughout the 2024 cycle is people just did not know what Democrats stood for outside of being anti-Donald Trump. And that's not enough. So that's what I'm looking for in leadership.
So let's talk a little bit about the US Senate if you decide to run. What is your message to the people of Michigan? What do you want to do? What do you bring to the race? And why, if you decide to run, should they vote for you?
Yeah, I mean, I started down this path a little bit, but I'm a millennial, and by and large, I am part of the first generation that writ large is likely going to do worse than our parents. Where I talked to so many people in my generation. I graduated from college from Notre Dame in 2008, right into the recession with a degree in industrial design. I wanted to be a car designer at just about the worst time in American history to do that. And I lived in the back of my car and I didn't have health insurance. The Affordable Care Act didn't exist yet. And I had tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. And so many people my age and younger are still digging out of that hole and don't believe they're ever going to be able to afford to buy a house. Housing prices have doubled just from 2019 to now. They would love to start a family, but they can't afford it. That we don't have universal childcare. We don't have paid leave. We don't have a support system that supports working moms in this country. And people just don't envision that they're going to have the careers that they wanted with the free time that they deserve. That's another piece of, my generation has always pushed having a job, having a side hustle, picking up a gig work. And you don't have time to take a break. So I think in a state like Michigan, the American dream in Michigan was always to have the life you always wanted and have a place up north and have time to go on vacation and spend with your family and spend with your friends. I got elected in 2018 because a lot of my future constituents looked at me and said, "You remind me a lot of my daughter who left and went to Chicago or New York or Denver. Why did you come to Michigan? And what can we do to make this a place where my kids will stay?" So that's what got me into office the first time. I am now the Senate Majority Whip in Michigan. We have done a lot to deliver for people on that promise. And that's what I hope to bring to the rest of the state.
As a US Senator, you're going to have lots of issues that come before you. Do you have a particular why? Do you have one or two that are really the most compelling for you that you would seek out committee assignments in order to move forward on? Or are you at this point kind of wide open to seeing what's out there?
Yeah, so a number of things. I am a mom of a 4-year-old. There are not many U.S. senators who are young parents, and that is something that is really important to me. Is childcare, is making universal pre-K a reality. That's something we've been fighting hard for here in Michigan. I'm also the chair of the Senate Economic and Community Development Committee, and something I've been working on for my 6 years in office is how do we position Michigan to lead in terms of what is the future? What is the knowledge economy? How do we tap into the prosperity of our past without trying to recreate the past? We became the automotive center of the country, not just because we can manufacture it, but because we invented it and designed it and innovated. And we have so many incredibly talented people who are running startups, who are leaning into clean energy. We have Black Tech Saturdays in Detroit, which is the largest gathering of Black tech entrepreneurs in the entire country. How do we uplift them and make sure they have the resources and the funding that they need to succeed? And that's a lot of what I'm thinking about when I look at federal office is committee assignments that support that vision, that support families, that support entrepreneurs, and support making Michigan the state that is leading on how do we solve some of the greatest crises that we will face as a country.
Let me go back to where we started as we begin to wrap up. In your floor speech, you introduced yourself as you said earlier in this interview, as a white Christian straight mom, but you gave a message of support to everybody in the community. You were sort of picked out, I'm not sure why you in particular, but as someone who was pursuing some radical social dream. There's now a debate in the Democratic Party. Do we talk about cultural issues? Do we not? Is it a matter of talking or not talking, or is it about how you talk about those issues?
It's about how you talk about it. One of the reasons that I think my speech resonated the way that it did is because I talked about myself. And I talked about myself and my upbringing in the church, the way that my mom raised me, the values of Catholicism, that we were of service to others, and to point out that people who are different are not the reason why your healthcare costs are too high or why our roads are in disrepair. And we can't shy away, but we also have to respond in a way that makes sense to the majority of people. So let's not let Republicans define us. Let's reclaim the message and put forward what we are fighting for to answer that question that so many people have. What are the Democrats doing for me? And we always have to think about the person on the other end of the conversation.
And last question for you. The book says, don't give way to hate. It's very hard for many people because they are very angry, whether it's at Donald Trump, whether it's at Musk, whether it's at losing their federal job, whether it's losing food from the local food bank. How do you talk to people about the anger they feel and how they might take that emotion, generate it in some other way? Because at the end of the day, we all have to live together. And win or lose, you're going to have to get up in the morning and talk to your neighbor and talk to your work colleague who may not have a similar political view. What would you say to those people?
First of all, you have every right to be angry. I have no patience for people who lie and say everything's going to be okay, just get over it. We don't know that it is. But I hope that people would channel that energy and that anger into something positive. We can't change policy without the numbers to do so. So that means thinking about we have to get a majority of people on our side to hold a majority of seats in the Congress and the US Senate to make these changes. And that requires giving people space, maybe people who voted for Donald Trump and are coming out in droves to these coffee hours or participating in these focus groups to say, this is not what I voted for. I see a lot of chatter online of people saying, well, you got what you voted for. We have to welcome people back in. And that takes a little bit of humble pie, but use that energy and anger to do one thing every day, whether that's just finding out where your local Democratic Party is, whether it is signing up to volunteer with a candidate who's running for office who you align with. And I guarantee you it'll make you feel better. For every hour you spend doom scrolling or fighting your uncle or aunt on social media, knocking on doors and talking to people who live in your neighborhood is actually really lovely. And you realize how much we really do have in common and that we are all more powerful than we think we are.
Well, I can understand why you have gotten the attention you have. You have a clear and I think very accessible message for Americans. So, best of luck, whatever you decide to do on the Senate race. And I have a feeling we're going to be seeing more of you. So, we would welcome you back anytime to the Contrarian. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jen. This was great.